Now we got the comments. Are you guys here now? Are you guys here now? Anybody back? All right. You guys there? When you guys get in here, drop some new comments. Because I can see the comments now. I knew there was a problem. Now, you guys are always posting comments. I knew there was a problem. Drop some new comments for me so I can make sure I can see the new comments. All right, good. We got some new comments here. I'm not going to talk too much about the wine. I'm going to talk about that in my next show where it matters more. But this is a Côte de Bruy. It is from Jean-Claude Lapalou, and it's a wonderful, wonderful French biodynamic wine from Beaujolais region, Beaujolais Cru. I used to have a bunch of bottles of this guy, and this is a 2013. It's pretty old for a Beaujolais. So this is actually going to be very different from what you'd expect from a Beaujolais. Jose, I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry. You'll have to catch the replay. Unless you want to play this loud for the entire audience on the plane. All right. Ooh. That's a bit... Not showing very nice. Not showing very nice. You guys got to share this video. Only got 19 viewers right now. Tempted to not, in the future, try to help out these euros. There we go. That's 30. 30 right now. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go. Once I get to 35 live viewers, I'll start talking about stuff. Let me be a feisty this episode, by the way. I'm in a feisty mood. All right. 39 followers. It's good. So, we're going to be talking about a lot of nitty-gritty stuff and really trying to assess the situation, exactly what's going on and where things are going down the road. Here is something that's really important, though. Really, really important. And I know I'm going to piss some people off. Probably not you guys so much, but I'm going to piss some people off. But look, you need to understand that it's not always simple. It's not always easy. And as a leader, you are not always presented with good options. All right? It's fortunately moderating a little bit over the last few days. But I have to say this. I really have to say this. And it's going to piss people off. I don't blame Putin for going to war. I don't like war, and it's awful what's happening to the Ukrainian people as a result of the war. But how can you put a country in a situation where they have serious security concerns? You back them up against the wall, and you give them a choice that they either fight now or bend over and watch their country gradually fall apart. I feel like people don't we've been talking about the cabal and they get the cabal. They don't seem to understand that the Ukrainian government is the cabal. Okay? Putin is not the cabal. Putin is not a good guy. Okay? Esoteric circles, you'd call him neutrally polarized. He's a ruthless man. He is not interested in freedom for all of his people. He's not interested in creating unity and oneness, and he's not Trump. Trump much more interested in people being able to chart their own course and being given the freedom to chart their own course. Putin is not that. Putin is not that. Putin is not a white hat. But Putin is not cabal. And so this is the way it's been. Putin has been okay. He wrested Russia from the hands of the cabal in the early 2000s. And in order to survive in that environment, it's also the environment he came up through, he had to be extremely ruthless. He's killed political opponents. Okay? This is stuff that Trump wouldn't do. But he's killed political opponents. He's had a ruthless path to power. But he's not cabal. And he cares about Russia. He cares about Russia. And he sees this as a direct threat to Russia. He's not going along with their plans. He doesn't want to go along with their plans. And he doesn't, frankly, like seeing these child fuckers rape and pillage a country that he emotionally and arguably historically believes is part of the same cultural and ethnic background as the Russian people. But make no mistake here, and this has been going around a lot, Putin is not a white hat and he's not cooperating with Trump. They are not cooperating with each other. They have different objectives, but the one thing that they have in common is they have the same enemy. Now, my understanding is that Putin would have been fine being part of EU and NATO in just being able to develop Russia and being treated like equals. I think that was the sentiment among most Russians at the end of the Cold War. The popularity of the United States in Russia at the end of the Cold War was in the mid to high 70s. It was well over 70%. And think about that for a second. You have a country that you've been at war with. You've been at war with a country for, 60 years almost? No, it's not quite 60, but like, let's be generous and let's say 46 to 91, right? So 45 years you've been at war with a country. And when the war ends, you love the people who won. I mean, that was the perspective of Russians after the war. And yet Goldman Sachs and all those groups looted the country. And you saw the life expectancy of men in Russia drop to the high 50s. It was bad across Eastern Europe, but it was particularly bad in Russia. And here's the big difference between Russia and the rest of Eastern Europe, is that the rest of Eastern Europe at least had this white light that the EU was willing to bring them in. But guess who they weren't willing to bring in? Russia. So they would help all these former Soviet satellites, but they wouldn't help Russia. Russia is like the bullied kid on the playground, but the thing that's so crazy about this is that they're bullying the strongest kid on the playground. It's like the strongest kid on the playground wants to be your friend, wants to work together, but they don't want him because probably they don't want, because it is the biggest and most powerful, they don't want it in the club. And also you can get to the whole other stuff historically with the Khazars and why they even wanted to do the communist revolution in Russia to begin with, why they targeted Russia with orthodoxy and everything. You can get down that rabbit hole if you want to, but even just keeping it simple and straightforward, they didn't want Russia in the club. And so, and they weren't content, and they just disrespected it at every turn. And so you have to understand, if you have biolabs across the country, if you have in Ukraine, right, that are arguably being used to develop weaponry, you have Ukraine talking about developing nuclear weapons, being flooded with NATO money. It was only a matter of time before this was a critical security concern for Russia. It was a critical security concern. It's the equivalent of if Russia was making Canadians absolutely hate America. Hate them. Think of them as like the Americans have pillaged and hated the Canadians their entire existence, and that they were then talking about moving nuclear weapons, into having Canada develop its nuclear weapons program when it's antithetical to the United States. It hates the United States. I mean, this is the kind of propaganda stuff that's going on. Okay, so point of all this stuff is that people need to get out of the fucking binary here. You can't say, well, Putin, fuck Putin for doing this. No, fuck the cabal for doing this. Fuck the cabal for doing this. Seriously. You guys have to get your head around this. Stop being a bunch of fucking pussies. Putin saw no other way out. And you know what? Somebody here needs to tell me what he could have done differently that would not have permanently jeopardized Russia in the long term. All he ever asked for was to be left alone. Leave us the fuck alone. But they didn't do that. They went after him in Syria to try to get rid of his naval base there, to kill the Christian population there, and to be able to then install their own pro-regime where they could then use a gas pipeline from Saudi Arabia through Syria to Europe so they could bypass Russia. Everything that they've been doing has been designed to try to cripple Russia. And so you look at Putin, somebody who is ruthless, and they keep pushing him over and over and over again, relentlessly shelling ethnic Russians in the Donbass, and then not even when he pulls back to then intensify the shelling. It's like, if you're going to disrespect somebody so much, they will ultimately hit you back. And so all these people who are like freaking out about Ukraine, how Putin could do this thing in Ukraine, guess what? You are not capable of leading. You are not capable of leading. You do not have the capacity as a man to make difficult decisions when the defense of your country and your tribe is on the line. You are a mentally weak man. That is what I'm telling you. You are a mentally weak man. And you're not going to like what I'm saying about this, but you got to get it through your fucking head. If someone messes with you over and over and over again and puts your country at a critical security risk, and you do not do anything about it, then you are not capable of leading. What we have in the West right now are a bunch of psychopaths running the country, and they are trying to move this entire world towards nuclear war. That's what's going on right now. They are blinded by their own power, and they are using Russia. There's a lot of stuff going on here, but they are trying to provoke this whole war thing, because of their economic situation. They try to blame Russia for it because it's already collapsing, and they can blame Russia for the war, try to get Russia bogged down in Ukraine, get him overthrown, try to have a color revolution. But the bottom line here, as this escalates, and I'm going to put some predictions on the table here. I think there is going to be some kinetic action between NATO and Russia. Okay? I think that there's going to be some kinetic action between NATO and Russia. And I think NATO is going to provoke it. And I don't know whether that involves some planes, NATO planes going into Ukraine, and Russia shoots them down and things escalate. But this is going to get to the point of being nuclear. And I'm going to tell you something. Russia's not going to blink. When I look at I've been looking at a lot of this Russian media recently. I've been looking at Putin giving speeches. They are acting with they know the stakes. But when you're trying to make a decision, and you it's the moment before the decision when you know that you're about to make something that could cost you everything, when you're about to put all the chips in. That's a really tenuous moment. That's when the tension's high. Once you put the chips in, there's no longer any concerns about going back. Right? There's no, then you've crossed the Rubicon, and actually you can focus a bit more, because now you understand that there's nothing else that you can do but to continue to go forward. Russia is not bluffing when they are telling Western countries that they will nuke this fucking planet before the cabal messes with Russia. That is what's going on right now. And I'm telling you that before they were okay with being part of the EU, then they were okay with just simply the remaining, their primary interests in Syria, in Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, that stuff would be respected. But now, look, Putin said that he's going to they're just going to denazify Ukraine, but I will tell you that at this point, I think all of those, Belarus, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan, are all going to come under the control fully of Russia. I don't even mean it like if they're a puppet state. I'm talking more of like a Eurasian kind of EU, where the armed forces are unified together. There's a political unification between them, essentially. It won't be exactly like a clear annexation that this is part of Russia proper. Necessarily, it might not be. But those countries are going to be fully integrated and probably autonomous states beneath some larger structure. And it's going to happen with Belarus. Belarus has already basically said, let's go for it. Let's do it. Kazakhstan, after what happened with that regime change situation, that is also going to happen, I think, as well. And Ukraine's going to be the difficult one. But at this point, like, what people have to understand is that there is no going back for Russia. They have no reason even. There's no reason to give Europe Western Ukraine, right? You could make an argument that from a Russian perspective, and I don't personally agree with this, right? I see a difference between Ukraine and Belarus with Poland and Lithuania and Estonia. But you can make an argument that those countries going into the EU is already, from the Russian, if you're an extreme Russian perspective, you could make that argument. The point is, I don't think he's given up anything. I think he takes the whole fucking thing. Maybe he'll let the Hungarians, if they are so bold, take the small parts of Transcarpathia for themselves. But he's going to unify basically all the Slavic people, East Slavic people. That's what's going to happen. And because he has no reason not to. His intention now is to make Russia a completely greater Russia, let's put it that way, as he's going to probably describe it, a completely autonomous, powerful country that does not need the West. And guess what? He's been preparing for that for a long period of time. Most of the sanctions being put out here are stupid and meaningless except for one. So SWIFT, right? Apparently, there's other ways to go around SWIFT. You have XRP, maybe I'm being speculative here. But you already have Bitcoin. People can go around it with that. But most importantly, SWIFT is really just a means of moving money around the world. So China, India, and Russia, if they don't want to use the dollar, they can move around it. And there's already plans for that. There's already stuff in place. Russia has announced that they're going to be making a huge new pipeline going to China. Why is this important? Well, I mean, and we're going to talk about the China-Russia connection in a second. But let's focus on Europe first. Europe, and particularly Germany, the stupidest fucking people you could ever have as leaders. Honestly, Biden almost seems like a better leader than whoever this fucking guy, Scholz or whatever, who's running Germany right now. Absolute, total moron. Because Germany has no energy whatsoever, depends on all of its energy for Russia, and they're going to go and they're going to make this big move of trying to freeze Russian central bank assets. Let's talk about this for a second. So this is actually the one sanction, it's never really been done before, to do this to another country. They are going to freeze Russia's basically rubles that exist in other countries are going to accounts. They're going to freeze them. So the purpose of this is going to drive down the price of the ruble dramatically. However, here's the issue. Germany and the rest of Europe, for the most part, needs Russian gas. So they're not going to cut off the gas, right? Not going to cut off the gas supplies, because then you have literally no energy, not only to heat homes, but to run industry. Everything in Europe could completely shut down. They have no alternatives. Okay? They have no alternatives whatsoever. Now, it's probable that Russia won't cut all the gas to Europe, even though that would be a great way of really fucking with them. But it's guaranteed that they're going to gradually cut year after year after year. And so in Europe, you can expect to see, we're gonna probably see close to $9, $10 gas in the United States, because the fucking idiots won't open our pipelines. We have plenty of oil in US and Canada, but we're not gonna go after it. So you guys are gonna see $9 or $10 gas. But in Europe, I don't even know how things are gonna work. I have no idea how things are going to work over there, because they're going to keep jacking up these prices. But here's the thing with the sanctions. Okay, so you tank the price of the ruble, but then Russia's going to have massive, massive foreign exchange, because they're still going to be buying all this gas from Russia. They're just going to be paying a ton more for it. And so in the end, it starts to balance out for Russia, so long as the Europeans are economically dependent on Russia. And by the way, you can have all this inflation happen in Russia, but Russia has plentiful food supply, especially now that they have Ukraine, or they will have Ukraine soon. They have plentiful food supply, and they have plentiful gas. So all the fundamental stuff that Russians need to survive, the essentials are not going to go up in price. They're not going to be able to get the new iPhone, maybe. Okay, that could happen. But I mean, this is the funny thing about this stuff, is that these are sanctions that actually hurt the people who hate Putin already. So, the West is so fucking smart that every single sanction they're doing is affecting the people who are most anti-Putin. So, you have all the Russian students in Paris now are going to get kicked out of school. These people, you think these people like Putin? They're idiots. Absolute fucking idiots. It's the only way to look at it. And I'm tired of hearing people complain about, Putin shouldn't have done this stuff. These are the people running your country. They're idiots. Do not blame Putin for responding to a bunch of idiots. But I'm telling you, he's willing to go to the brink. And I'm also telling you, these people are so fucking stupid, they are going to push all the way up until somebody's finger is hovering right over the button. Now, here's the rub. Well, I don't know how much Putin knows. Putin certainly knows that Biden isn't in full control of the government. I mean, Russia has intelligence assets, of course, in this country. Every country in the world and the actual higher levels knows what happened with the election, knows about the coup against Trump, and they probably aren't sure who is it in the United States that actually has access to that, those launch codes. I'm telling you, they know it's not so clear-cut that Biden's making that decision. Now, they may not know all the details, but that's one of the things that's going to be happening. But the thing is, Russia, these sanctions ultimately aren't going to do that much to Russia, because Russia has been preparing for this. Back in 2014, they weren't prepared. They got really, really fucked by a lot of the sanctions after they took Crimea. A lot of companies that had all this debt. Now it's not the case. Russian corporations are not exposed to foreign debt, and Russia's been stacking up on gold and even silver, and of course Bitcoin. And I'll say again, if you want to cut Russia off of the world economy, you can't do it. especially the Western economy, because Russian gas, Russian metal, Russian food even, especially with Ukraine now, because Ukraine provides some of the most food for the entire world. It's like United States and Ukraine provide huge amounts of food. So that's where we're at right now. That's where we're at. This is going to intensify because we have insane people running Western countries. But don't take that out on Putin. I'm not saying you have to like him. Nobody, and I'm not saying you have to like war. Like I said on Twitter, I mean, we are looking into ways trying to get our apartment. We have a small apartment in Poland, not our main apartment, which isn't finished, but we have a small apartment in Poland that we want to open up to refugees coming from Ukraine to Poland. Look, Ukrainian people, even if I might have a personal disagreement with an individual Ukrainian about what's going on in the situation, the reality is that they are pawns in this whole thing. You have fucking psychopaths telling people to pick up Molotov cocktails, to, they are really Nazis. I mean, you guys have to see some of these videos of the Azov battalion. They're doing, it's not just that they like have a SS symbol. Okay, they're doing like the ceremony of lights. They're doing all sorts of shit that the Nazis did. Doing the Nazi hand salutes. And I've seen videos of them. They'll just shoot fire rounds into a village. I mean, nobody has any idea what the people in the Donbass have been dealing with. It's been really fucking awful. Yeah, Zelensky's cabal. Zelensky's an actor. Okay? He's an actor. Now, I do want to mention something about Putin. People have pointed out, oh, well, Putin went to he went to a kibbutz when he was younger. He was a member of the World Economic Forum. Now they just started to talk about how they're going to do, they're going to have a new global one world currency. Look, you have to use discernment. You have to use discernment. And if you think that right now Russia and the cabal are on the same team and they're working together, you just don't have it. You're not tapping into the higher levels of awareness. And I'm sorry if I'm going to offend some people. I keep an open mind about this stuff. I'm not saying you're stupid for bringing it up. I'm just saying you're missing an ability to read somebody's emotional field. You're too much in your head. And you're making it's the same stuff with these people who are making these threads like Trump is with cabal. Here's this esoteric symbolism. They're all together. No, you have to be able to read somebody's energetic field. If you cannot read somebody's energetic field, then you're unable to figure out exactly what's going on here. And by the way, the higher logic also supports that, because none of the behavior going on right now is like, oh, they're all working together, for the same ends here. People are putting out there, what's one of the big reasons people are saying this. This is like a really big thing for people. The fact that Putin is not using his best troops and his best equipment in Ukraine. Like, well, that means that it's all a charade, right? They don't really care. It's all just look. Can anybody think for a second, why would Putin not want to commit his frontline troops into Ukraine? Anybody know why? Anybody think for a reason why? Because they're about to have a standoff with NATO. And Ukraine is not worth putting your frontline troops into it. If you're going to have to go against NATO, do you want your frontline troops exhausted inside Kiev when NATO decides to do something? No, it's fucking obvious, but yet somehow this evades people's attention. No, you're going to keep them on ready in the West, so that if NATO decides to try something, they know they're not getting the second line troops. Why on earth, you have all this old Soviet equipment, which is still, in most cases, better than what the Ukrainians have, because you have air power and you have way better command and control and you have higher numbers. the difference between using the frontline stuff you have in the old crap, okay, you can afford the old crap to get fucked up and broken down because it's not going to be useful against NATO. It is going to be useful in Ukraine. And all of the stuff, all the new recruits, they're not conscripts, but they are new recruits. They're professional soldiers. Russia does not have a conscript army. Belarus has a conscript army. Russia has a lot of green soldiers, but these guys going into Ukraine are probably going to get some good war experience. But maybe afterwards they use their primary troops because they're going to be better at dealing with civilian population. But the reality is that if you're not trying to hit civilian casualties in a heavy way, you're not doing a shock and awe where you're going to fucking turn the cities into Grozny. Although, by the way, that may yet happen. All this old equipment is perfectly suitable for Ukraine. You want to save your best units in case they need to fight against NATO. Should be fucking obvious, but everybody is so, out here trying to make these sort of decisions about, they're losing the war, they're losing the social media war. Well, maybe they are. Maybe they are. But a lot of these Ukrainian claims are so ridiculous now that even it's starting to make even Western people question the whole thing. I mean, maybe not the normies, but it's starting to get to the point where, look, this stuff is getting pretty absurd. How can we trust anything going out here? Soros is supporting Ukraine. Wait a minute, what the fuck? What's going on? People are waking up a lot faster, and I give them credit for that. We're only a week in. How long did it take for COVID? Overall, people are doing better. But you just got to understand that Russia probably doesn't care that much because guess what else is happening in Ukraine right now? They are taking... They have their targets. They know, with Biden, Burisma, they know what's been going on in Ukraine. And look, I'm not saying, some people will disagree with this characterization. Ukrainians are separate people. Fine. But from the perspective of the Russians, what the cabal is doing to Ukraine is like if some stranger is raping your little sister and they've raped and abused her so that she now hates you. And so that you finally decide that there's no way for you to deal with this guy. You try to reason with her. You try to get him out of the, so you decide to beat the shit out of him. That is, and take your sister back. That's how Putin looks at the situation with Ukraine. Now, again, she's her own woman, but is she really her own woman? Maybe it's not fair to say that she should be under the thrall of her brother versus this guy who's raping her. But the point is that Ukraine is a hijacked country, like our countries are hijacked countries. And they've preyed on this long-standing wound in the Ukrainian psyche and emphasized this nationalism. At any rate, point is though, I guarantee you Putin's got the goods, is getting the goods. There are people who are being taken into custody. There's information that's being acquired by special forces. You better believe it. Just because you didn't hear it on Twitter, don't think it's not happening. And that information will be used later on. But I can tell you fundamentally, used later on in trials and also to discredit the Western regimes. But I can tell you, Putin does not really give a fuck about what idiots say on Twitter. Because at this point, they've taken the route of hard power over soft power. And you can talk your way up your ass, but he's going to punch you in the face. That's the way it is. If you cross the line, you're going to get punched. That's the way it is right now. So, I want to move from this to a more expanded point about China and Russia and the whole situation. So, China, you have China and the globalists who were working together to crush the United States. But China's also backstabbed the globalists and is working in its own interests. So China's part of the cabal in one sense, and it's not part of the cabal in another sense. I think as much as China would love to backstab Russia, the reality is that China does not have a lot of resources and it has a massive population. It can't feed itself and it can't fuel itself. Okay? So, if a country can't, right now, China gets its food and its fuel from mostly the United States. I'm sure that there's all sorts of other routes, Saudi Arabia. The point, let's speak more generally here. If that gets blocked from the United States, if the situation in the United States, because they know that they don't have full control over the situation in the States. They know it's a matter of time before the States comes out of their control. So they're hoping to do as much damage as they possibly can do to the States. They need a backup plan. And the backup plan is Russia. Now, they may love to take out Russia too. I mean, honestly, in the Russian Far East, it's not just about like fuel. It's not just about fuel and food. I mean, honestly, the Russian Far East has tons of water, which Russia also doesn't have, clean water. I mean, China would love the Russian Far East, but they know Russia's not run by an idiot like Western countries. And they also know that if they get cut off from Western sources, they need a backup plan. Because if they don't have Russia in reserve, they are really, really screwed. And so don't think that Xi and Putin are working together because they like each other. I don't see any sort of love lost between them. But both of them share the common objective of taking America off of its high horse, taking the West off of its high horse as this corrupt institution, global institution that can dictate terms to everybody. China and Russia would both prefer multipolarity than unipolarity, especially when it's under this sort of regime. So that's why you see them working together. Now, the big question on everybody's minds is what is going to happen with Taiwan? Now, I mentioned in another episode some of the intel I had from somebody basically about, it's not logistically very easy for China to do this. They don't have the proper assault craft. And, the weather has to be just right. However, there's a narrow window here. You have to think of it from this perspective. If China knows that they're going to lose their hold on the U.S. within maybe the next year, it's hard to tell how much longer, you have to go big or go home. You have to do it before maybe Trump comes back. I mean, they know it's a tenuous hold on things in the States. They're trying to mess the place up as much as possible, hold on to it as long as possible. But this is not something that they can deal with. They don't have long-term optionality. So like I predicted with Ukraine, that it was going to happen in Ukraine late February just because of the leverage from the winter, etc., which turned out to probably not be that relevant. Probably the biggest relevance was the esoteric symbolism of 222, right? However, China, I initially, before I knew these details about the weather and stuff, I thought that it would maybe happen around the same time. However, combination of the fact that it looks like that China can only invade in proper weather conditions, which would be April and October, and the fact that the West is not quite distracted enough with Russia yet. I mean, it's distracted, don't get me wrong, but let's see how much further we can go with this whole thing. How much can you get Defense Command worried that at any second there's going to be a nuclear missile fired? I think when that happens, China attacks Taiwan. And here's the thing that's going to be different. Because while I think it's possible that there will be some kinetic action between U.S. and NATO, and, honestly, I think it's likely that NATO doesn't make it out of this. I don't mean this from like all the NATO countries get wiped out. I mean that it's likely that NATO as an organization ceases to exist because, frankly, it's not really a tenable organization. It hasn't been for a while. It's a big fucking joke. But the point here is that it seems likely to me that China would strike when that moment happened. And that moment is probably going to be in April. Probably going to be in April because the conditions will be right. Now, the big difference here is that while there might be some kinetic action between Russia and NATO, in order for, unless there's a significant movement of U.S. forces away from Taiwan because of something Russia does, the difference here is that China is going to have to go through U.S. ships. So the question here is, do they not attack the U.S. and go after Taiwan and see if U.S. will attack them and actually defend Taiwan? I don't know how feasible that is. I mean that honestly. I don't know the details of the military situation there. Or are they going to take the really, really bold route of actually hitting U.S. carrier groups with hypersonic missiles, which they have? Everybody's been talking for years about the fragility of U.S. fleets. And look, these are bold predictions. But the more I'm feeling the energy, I'm becoming more and more skeptical that the West gets out of this without a bloody nose, militarily speaking. Again, not going to nuclear war, but I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it's too much. Maybe it would be too much for them to hit the carrier groups in order to get Taiwan, but it's on their agenda. As Jeff says here, they've shut off the transponders. They're confusing the Navy. Look at April, and if you want to look astrologically, look at the end of April for when they may move. Oh, that's not Ukraine colors. That's like a feather duster. It's a feather duster. And no, it's not related to gay pride. I don't know why it's a rainbow. Nice observation there. You say, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm being hypocritical here. I'm talking about all this stuff. I got the Ukraine flag in the background. No, I think things are going to get hot, though. I mean, it's not just going to be Russia, Ukraine. Look, I think we've been naive before. We've seriously thought that, excuse me, I'm trying to, hands cramping up from holding this thing at the angle. We thought that we could get away with this stuff without, trust the plan, there's not going to be any problems. No. Sorry. As I said it before the war started, people are going to die, and more people are going to die. More people are going to die. I mean, I don't like it, but that's just the reality. It's the reality of the situation. So, that's the main stuff I got for you guys right now. Do you have any questions? You guys got any questions? I'll answer them before I jump on the next show. Any questions? Questions. We got some questions here. Just say no to gay Ukrainian feather dusters. Jeff, I don't believe in the Sarah, at least how it's been put. I just don't believe in it. I do think we'll have a golden age in the aftermath of this, but it's not because, we're going to get all this gold hidden and everybody's going to get free shit all the time and it's going to be perfect utopia. I think we're going to have to rebuild the world. We're going to have to rebuild the world. That's the way it is. I mean, I expect this war to end in 2024, and I expect us to have half a decade of completely broken down society. And I don't know how much of it's going to be broken down from kinetic action versus, the population damage from what. But I'm more inclined to what Cliff has said about this, which is that we're going to have a rebuilding period. And And, everyone talks about how things are becoming more decentralized. Part of that is going to be out of necessity because you're going to have the entire global supply chain fucked up. So people are going to have to get used to dealing with things on a more local level. They're going to have to get used to manufacturing things on a local level. And so that's the way it's going to go. That's the way it's going to go. Thoughts on Ukraine allegedly joining the EU? Well, that's a good point. And also with March 12th. I mean, look, I saw that on the timeline today. It's not the Ides of March. It's a significant date. I would look at that thread. They talk about it. Benjamin Braddock talks about it. I don't really know, to be honest. I'm just not as well versed in it. But there's a lot of astrological conjunctions going on there. I mean, Paul's always talked about March 7th being the sort of final exam. There's just, like, think of it from the perspective that just there's going to be a lot of crazy stuff happening throughout this entire time period. The Q drops, March Madness, right? It's going to get a lot crazier. We are in, depending on how you look at it, I mean, I've heard some describe it as phase 2, but I think we're at the third part of the series. The first part of the series was COVID. The second part was the election. And now we're at, we could actually say it's part 4. First part's COVID. Second part's election. Third part's vaccine. Fourth part is now war. Maybe you call the first 3 sub-stories of the first part. Whatever. However you want to divide it. The fact of the matter is we're in a different phase. We all know it, which is why we're having these shows again more often. Because there's more shit going on. I mean, what we were talking about before, once a month was fine to check in. Now we've got serious stuff happening. And it's going to get more serious. You better fucking believe it's going to get more serious. I am really tired of hearing people who think it's just going to be rainbows and flowers and everything's going to turn out. No. It's going to be fucking rough before we get to the end of this. And you guys all need to seed the consciousness, and you need to be grounded and understand that everything that's happening right now had to happen and will pass. It's part of the collapse of the old structure. The cabal does not collapse without this war standoff. They always have to overreach. Putin is going to play his role, not for us, but for Russia, to break these fuckers, because he hates them as much as we do. He doesn't have the same goals, but he hates them as much as we do. All right. Jeff, what changed my mind about Nasara Jassara? I mean, I heard that stuff early on. I kept an open mind about it. I just like any of this sort of fanciful stuff that everything is going to be given to us. I don't believe in that. I think that at this point, when I think of that, it becomes too much of an inversion. Like you're promised everything. Everything's just automatically going to become good. We know from history that that's just not the way it is. When evil takes root, it takes time for good to build up a strong foundation. So I don't think that there's going to be some super quick fix. I don't think it's going to be as long as people think, because we have technology now that allows us to communicate faster. But is this going to be similar to what happened at the end of the Bronze Age, when you saw whole civilizations just disappear? Could be. I don't actually think it's going to be that bad. I do think we head to a multipolar world at the end of this, though. I think you're going to see, you're going to have China, India, this sort of expanded Russia, maybe the EU. It's not going to be the EU itself probably, but a different kind of EU. US, Canada, maybe Anglosphere kind of thing. Africa, South America, who knows the details of this stuff, but we're heading towards a multipolar world, and that these different domains are going to be on a new kind of global organization by the time we get into the 2030s, and they're going to work together in the exploration of space. I mean, it's just the way it's going to be. So, yeah, there'll be a handful of domains, not too many, somewhere between 5 and 11 or something, 5, 12, 13, something like that, probably. The stuff though with Ukraine joining the EU, well, they're asking to join the EU. Now, will they join the EU? I don't know. Probably, to be honest, because the EU is going to make stupid decisions. So maybe this is one of the pretexts that they say, well, now he's attacking an EU state, and so now the EU has to get mobilized. I'm going to be honest. I actually think the standoff with Russia is less US versus Russia, and it's more Europe versus Russia. I think this is one of the reasons why psychics have really focused on the nuclear threat being on Britain. I think that Europe and Russia are the ones who are going to have the biggest stuff, because Biden, he even said that US isn't going to do anything in Ukraine. Even though he's been pushing some of the economic stuff in the background, on a militant side, it's the Brits who are being the most aggressive towards Russia. And also the Brits do have access to their nukes, unlike, in my opinion, Biden. So these are variables to consider, basically, in the whole thing. All right, let me see here. I'm not familiar with the Grimes image timeline. Hey, it's my pleasure doing these shows, guys. Yes, childbirth is not easy, but the result is absolute beauty. That's the reality. I mean, we're going through childbirth right now. And look, it's a difficult one. It's going to be a difficult one. But the baby will be born, so you just got to suck it up and get through it. Will the U.S. weaken as a world power as a result of this? 100%. 100%. U.S. is done as being a world power. Now, look. All right, let me rephrase that. It's done as being the world power. Okay, we're not going back to the Pax Americana. We're not doing it, and we're not doing it for two reasons. The first reason is because we're watching it disintegrate in front of our eyes. No one will be saying this a year from now if they actually still hold on to this delusion that the U.S. is the sole power that gets to mediate the entire world. But the second thing is that it's not even energetically aligned, because multipolarity, a healthy multipolarity versus like the sort of great power competitions that existed before, is necessary for our ascension into this next level of consciousness. So the U.S. might be the first among equals, and I actually think that there's a good chance of that. But it will still be among equals. The U.S. will not be able to decide they're going to shut off a country from the economy. They're not going to be able to decide that they can just invade a random place. The U.S., to the extent it will be the world leader, will be the world leader because when Trump returns and when we clean up our mess here, that the United States will have the highest consciousness on the planet and will be most equipped to lead us not only spiritually but economically into the new world. I mean, look, Russia, if you were to put Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan together, it is a formidable country, substantial population, right, in the 200 million, like 200 and probably about 200 and 220 million if you were to put all those four countries together. And we'll have plenty of, food and metal and fuel. I mean, respectable country, no question about it. The United States and Canada together, let's just put those two together. That domain would be 360 million people, and we have way more, we have at the very least comparable, but I would say greater amounts of food grain and whatever. Point is not to have like a dick swinging contest, like, oh, we got more, we got more. Point is that we will have the consciousness, because look, again with Putin, he's defending Russia. He's an important transitional figure. My belief is that when the cabal's done, I mean, he's in his 70s now. When the cabal is done, he will retire. Okay? That's my perspective. Or maybe he won't retire, but it won't be terribly long anyway. And by that point, Russia will be able to also move its consciousness and it'll catch up quickly. But the United States is the tip of the spear when it comes to planetary consciousness. And that is the most important thing when it deals with this tech. It's the most important thing. And if you want to believe in the ET stuff, there's a lot of indications that the ETs have chosen the American domain for that. So, let's see here. I'm going to keep going through all this stuff. I wonder when the arrests will start. I think that you will see arrests in the United States in the spring. But it's not going to be the mass arrests. You will start to see figures get arrested, though, as the Durham probe continues. I don't believe that we see military arrests until after it's really clear our economy is... until you start to see like $9 per gallon gas and probably some U.S. losses in the field with the threat of nuclear war. I think that's probably when it happens. And of course, you're also going to see more stuff coming out with the cases. I mean, the election cases. Guys, I got to tell you, like, even as I say this stuff, I don't know how crazy it's going to get, but we are just tasting it. We're really just tasting the chaos that's to come. And unlike some people who believe it's over, I believe the complete opposite. But they are correct that the chaos is coming. I just see the light at the end of that chaos. There is going to be technology collapses as well. However, it's going to be weird. It's going to be like a hybridized thing because we're still going to have tech. You're going to have blockchain. There's still going to be a lot of tech, but there's also going to be a collapse in tech. So you'll see this kind of weird situation where we're connected to the internet, but maybe we're going to have to learn how to fix our cars. We're sending money across to other places with crypto, but we don't have any spare parts. We got to use old automobiles and that kind of stuff. Like that's where I think it goes in the intermediary period, just because there is going to be this collapse in the supply chain. It's not going to be easy to get it back up. What should those of us who are artists be focused on? Depth over career growth? Well, look, you got to make money. You got to survive. I would not look for a career at this point in time. And by that I mean, like, don't try to find a career in the cabal system. At least not one that you're prepared to drop. You can milk it, but it's going. That's all going down. I'm not going to say that like everybody who's in a career is not going to have a career in 10 years at the same thing. I'm not going to be that extreme, but you need to be prepared for that to happen. You need to be prepared for the massive disruption that's coming across every sector of the economy. So the biggest thing that you can do is to continue to develop yourself, because if you yourself are prepared, I was talking with a client about this the other day, if you yourself are mentally prepared for what's coming, and you have value to offer and you're resilient, you're going to be useful in the future. Learn practical skills, learn things that can help people. And of course, milk the system as much as you can as it goes down. Not everything's going to fall apart. There's going to be some companies that'll manage this collapse well and they'll come to the forefront. But if you're still got your money in Pfizer, like, good fucking luck. Good fucking luck with that. Which brings me to a point some of you guys mentioned, and I want to just say it. Crypto is going to be really important in order to transact for a lot of us. I think it's almost an inevitability that by the time this is all over in the coming months, that there's going to be bank account shutdowns. I mean, they cut off Trudeau because he was maybe going too fast. The timing wasn't right, but So it was a mistake on their end because they showed their cards and they couldn't, push forward with it. So now people are going to be more prepared. It was a big mistake. But bottom line, you need to be prepared to be shot out of your bank account. You have to be prepared for it. And if you have your crypto on an exchange, it's not going to be worthwhile. It's not going to be worth anything. So make sure you have a couple of different wallets and stuff like that you can go to get by, just in case. Look, may not happen. Got gold, silver, you got crypto wallets. This is recommendations. I mean, that's my recommendation for you guys to think about. Not everyone's going to get hit, but more people will get hit than they think. If you're watching this, you'll probably get hit. I didn't see the new 9/11 footage sent to me on Twitter. I don't think the U.S. is going to balkanize. I don't believe those prognostications. The U.S. is going to stay together, and I actually think the U.S. is going to expand. I've said this before, I'll say it again. I believe that at a minimum, Canada and the United States are going to be joined by the end of the decade. Believe that. Everything points to it, as far as I'm concerned. However, the United States will be, as a country, much more decentralized. So the United States that most of us grew up in is a ridiculously centralized behemoth with tons of federal agencies and tons of, impositions on the states. I think you see a return, not an exact return, but you see a symbolic return to the United States as it initially was, which was really the states all had their individual power. The federal government was for defense, and it was more of a umbrella rather than the centers of economy and action. So I think we see a much more decentralized country. And by the way, that's part of the reason why it's not unreasonable to see Canada in it. Because a lot of these provinces in Canada will have more autonomy under this reconstituted United States than they would have under Canada. And I'll remind you guys that Canada is mostly directed by Ontario and to a lesser extent Quebec. But it's really Ontario has like nearly 40% of the country's population. So Canada is a very, very centralized country, as it is, which is why there's been all this frustration in places like Alberta and Saskatchewan. So I don't think that the idea of being under a collective umbrella without cabal legacy systems like Parliament and having tons of state autonomy is going to be very unappealing. That's my perspective. All right. With Biden and Hunter involved in Ukraine, does that tie into all of this? 100%. I mentioned that before when I was, I've covered a lot of things here, but the Russians are going to have evidence of that stuff. And you better believe me that once they have Ukraine secured, there's going to be a lot of that stuff being dumped out into the public view, which will in turn destabilize our countries as people will start to wake up more and more to things. How do you see cabal presence in the Nordic countries? The media is 100% cabal, but I'm not sure how much of everything else is penetrated. It's definitely cabal in the Nordic countries. There's no question about that. However, the reality is that the Nordic countries just really aren't that important. So they're small-scale things, right? At the end of the day, they're not big countries. I don't think there's a ton of focus on them as a result. They want to control the big ones. Germany, France, UK, lesser extent, Spain and Italy, like Norway, Sweden, Denmark. I mean, you only have so much resources and focus. You're less likely to put a heavy hand on them, which is the reality. When will climate change be revealed as a patio? I don't know exactly. It's going to be revealed with all this stuff. There was like an it's almost like incredulous the kind of arguments that you see people make. There was an article saying the case for a small nuclear war because it'll cool the planet and slow climate change. I mean, seriously sick fucking people. All right. I recommend buying gold and silver. I'm not a financial advisor, but I recommend buying some. Um, what about South American influx into U.S. affecting our culture? Look, I want a secure border. I have my own views on citizenship, and I'm actually very strict on citizenship and less strict on residency. Like, if I had my ideal structure, we would make it a lot easier to become a resident someplace else and a lot harder to become a citizen because a citizen votes in the direction of a country, and obviously birthright citizenship is absolutely ridiculous in the United States. I don't even believe, by the way, that it was is a correct interpretation of those the 13th Amendment. At any rate, the point here is that South American culture. Well, I don't know. I say U.S. and Canada. I don't know if that would include Mexico, and my sense is probably not. But South American or Mexican immigrants who have come to the United States. I mean, part of the big problem with what the cabal's plan was is that a lot of these people in the end didn't do what they wanted them to do. Like if you look at voting patterns right now, Hispanics in America are identical to white working class and how they vote. I think that they've assimilated pretty well into the country overall. Again, I'm anti more migration to the United States, certainly in any of the ways that we have it. I'm just saying that I don't really consider it a problem at this point for the U.S. to deal with. I do think that there will be some deportations in the U.S. and Europe. They actually may be self-deportations. I mean, I think it's probably pretty reasonable to see a lot of migrants getting the fuck out of these countries when the economies collapse because they have no work to do and they're not going to maybe gain benefit programs. So a lot of those demographic issues might just simply be solved by the economy collapsing. I mean, you're seeing in Ukraine and Poland right now, it's easily half of the people coming across the border to Poland are not Ukrainian. Now, you can have your opinions on that, but the reality is that a lot of those people were in Ukraine for economic reasons. They're going to go to Europe for economic reasons, but how much longer can Europe sustain its economy? This issue with Russia is going to collapse Europe. I mean, U.S. is going to get hit hard, but I'm not personally concerned about stocking up on food, stocking up on fuel in the U.S. unless you're trying to do some sort of arbitrage. If you're in Europe, you better be fucking stocking up. I'm not joking around. If you are in Europe, you better be fucking stocking up because you have nothing. You guys don't produce shit that comes directly from you. At this point in time, all your raw materials is coming from elsewhere. You're in for a world of pain with what's going to happen here. So, all right, guys. Well, appreciate the chat as always. We'll see how it goes. At this point, it's looking to be about 2 times a week, and as things accelerate, we'll move forward or taper back as needed. All right, I'll see you.